Sponsored by Surfshark.
Imagine you're a company with a successful product line, and your customer data tells you that fewer than 1% of customers actually use a given feature. Wouldn't you remove that feature to make room for something more compelling to a wider range of people? Maybe even something that would help you sell more products overall?
I think that's what Samsung was thinking when it deleted the least sticky features from the signature S Pen on its latest phone. And the trouble it ran into is twofold. First, when you're the scale of Samsung, 1% of users means 160,000 people from the last year of sales alone. And they're the kind of customers already predisposed to get vocal about phones. And second, the company didn't make a convincing case that it did anything compelling with the reclaimed space or component costs. Deleting the S Pen features didn't directly result in a phone with a bigger battery, for example, or integrated Qi 2 charging, or a design that's evolved much since 2022. And the new capabilities Samsung does offer up are rooted in the same Galaxy AI, whose benefits, to me, still seem rather dubious.
That's the best they can do? No, sir, but that's what they did.
Now, there is beauty to be found, both in the Galaxy S25 Ultra and in the scenes I was able to capture through its 5 cameras over 3 days in Northern California. Disclosure, Samsung paid for my travel and lodging, though it clearly had no editorial input or copy approval. But I still came away with the sense that this is a familiar phone from a brand that's becoming quite unfamiliar to me. Mostly that's due to Samsung's focus on the mainstream consumer, which almost always means falling into the trap of watering down any semblance of personality in an effort to appeal to the taste of the lowest common denominator. And lest you think I'm beating up on Samsung unfairly, I'll point out that I've also asked Apple and Google executives where the heck all the fun design has gone in their latest phones. This is an industry-wide issue, and it's a big reason I continue to value brands like Nothing and Motorola for, actually trying new things. Phones can and should still be fun. That said, there are pragmatic benefits to Samsung's slight design tweaks for 25 Ultra, starting with ergonomics. These rounded corners may be more generic, but they are also positively more comfortable. Just ask those of us who actually sprouted calluses from the corners on the prior model. Adding to the comfort is a 6% reduction in mass that's somehow actually noticeable, and the perennial slimmer bezels that give the screen 1 more tenth of an inch on the diagonal. Insanely dull developments, yes, but the rationale is something I find interesting. Samsung tells me this slimming was done both to appeal to more non-male customers and also to make the phone more svelte, specifically when put into a case. A case you'll need if you want magnetic wireless charging. Samsung follows OnePlus in omitting the magnets from the phone itself to save weight and thickness. Don't ask how Apple does it, I guess. The only other thing to cover on the enclosure is the cover glass. It's Gorilla Armor 2, with 29% greater fracture resistance versus last year, so that plus the titanium frame should make for a durable device. Thanks to its partnership with Google, Samsung is ahead on AI, which is good considering how heavily this phone relies on AI to sell itself. And while yes, I remain intensely skeptical about this hype bubble, I have to admit that the demos were more convincing this year. My buddy Chris Velasco of The Washington Post is the last person you want to talk to your AI phone because he's so well versed in the art of the comic non sequitur. Nevertheless, when he pointed the Ultra at a cafe menu written in French and asked for suggestions suited to his palate,
no, but I really hate soup. It makes me very angry. Are there non-soup dishes I can have here? Are there soups? I don't know.
Google Gemini hung in there.
Just to be clear, there aren't any soups on the menu. But there are some other options besides the steak and prawns that would be low in carbs, like the steak or the grilled prawns.
Outstanding. It's also now possible for apps to interact with each other to accomplish a compound task, something phone makers have been promising since the Palm Pre.
Hey, can you find out when the next 5 Golden State Warriors home games are and add those as an event in my calendar?
It's like, oh, it's all it's from my end. I guess so.
Okay. You want to create these 5 events. Do you want to go ahead and create them right now?
Yes, and can you also set an alarm for 2 hours before each of these events?
It's kind of fun to watch the hooks play.
I created the alarms.
There's also a nice feature called the Now Bar. No, not NYC's hottest club. It's a persistent control for music and background activities. When tapped, it brings you into a kind of briefing of the moment that's very thin at press time and hopefully gets fleshed out with more relevant info from your apps and services. Though I will point out that I always say that about Samsung-specific features, and rarely do developers show up in the numbers needed to truly flesh them out. Samsung has also taken a feature I use quite often, intelligent transcription of voice memos, and built it right into the dialer, so you can now record a phone call and have AI summarize it later. But even if you're bullish about AI, these features aren't reasons to buy this particular phone, because most of them aren't exclusive to it. Nick Sutrick over at Android Central used the same multi-extension prompts to execute commands across apps on the OnePlus 13, and I confirmed much of the same on the Razr Plus. Other tidbits from the demo area included an exploded view of the Ultra, showcasing the tiny main board, anchored by the requisite supercharged Snapdragon processor, cooled by a bigger vapor chamber, specs, and a portrait zone, where I could experience the dubious delights of AI caricature. I will never use an avatar like this. Am I so out of touch?
No, it's the children who are wrong.
One thing notably absent from the demos, the aforementioned S Pen, which has taken a big step back in capabilities to 2018. That was the year the Galaxy Note 9 dropped with a Bluetooth-enabled S Pen that could work as a remote shutter for the camera, and eventually a gesture-based controller for navigating the phone. Samsung says these days you can trigger the camera just as easily with a Galaxy Ring or Galaxy Watch, and fewer than 1% of its customers used the pen for this purpose. To be clear, the pen can still do all the fancy tricks that don't depend on Bluetooth. Hover previews, all those levels of pressure sensitivity, precision selection. This is not a sudden downgrade to, like, a Moto G stylus. But Samsung pulled off nothing short of magic by packing a gyro and capacitor and Bluetooth stack into a pen small enough to stuff into a phone. Imagine what it could have achieved if it continued to iterate on that audacious feat. Novel game controls, different input methods, more mobile art tools, you name it. Instead, the company made its $1,300 phone less noteworthy. And meanwhile, ancient annoyances persist. I've been begging for Samsung to make its hover scrolling feature work across more apps since the Galaxy Note 2. But despite the tight relationship with Google, it still doesn't even work across all stock Android apps. Also gathering dust, DeX, the desktop experience Samsung debuted in 2017 that turns your phone into a laptop. Or it would, if the company would just fix a handful of annoyances that have persisted since I last did a DeX deep dive in 2021. NextDock makes this laptop hardware, by the way, and was kind enough to send this review sample in time for me to use it in San Jose. I'll drop a link below if you want to learn more about it. But I can't recommend any DeX solution right now, because it's entirely possible it'll go the way of the fancy S Pen. There is one clear hardware upgrade beyond the chipset: the boost in resolution on the ultra-wide camera to a full 50 megapixels. Now, I had stayed in downtown San Jose before, and I knew there was precious little to capture in this clean but anodyne city center, rich in street art but lacking in apparent inhabitants. It gives me the feeling of a Hollywood backlot the studio forgot to fill with extras. So to test these cameras, I hit up one of my favorite websites, Atlas Obscura. Not sponsored, just a fan, to give me a destination a little further from the ordinary. This took me on a journey south, through the freeways, fields, and eventually footpaths of Santa Clara Valley. Here, between the gentle babble of Coyote Creek and the barely perceptible hum of the nearby 101, An unnamed artist has placed a plaque at the dead center of the valley, better known for the silicon that now defines it. The binary characters spelling out its geographic name. The camera didn't surprise at any point. I like the new attitude indicator in the heads-up display, and true cinematographers like Mark Lansangan can make its new log profiles truly sing. But if you're shooting from the hip like me and most people, you'll still need to manually crank down the exposure for pretty much every clip, as Samsung still seems to believe that bright equals beautiful. Next, since I was already far enough south to justify a side quest, I paid an overdue visit to Santa Cruz. I became obsessed with this town thanks to the cracker song Big Dipper. Contrary to what Google's AI summary will tell you, that song was not inspired by the constellation, but by the century-old roller coaster on the boardwalk, and a summer spent pining after lost love at a coffee shop. Well, that particular shop was destroyed in the Loma Prieta earthquake of 1989, but there's a lovely place called Lulu Carpenter's right next door. So anytime I pass through Santa Cruz, I make it a point to sit on the closest possible thing to the Cafe Zeno steps with a book I haven't started yet and watch all the world go by. The final camera feature I'll call out is the audio scrubber, now built right into the phone's video editor.
The idea being that in an environment with a lot of background noise, you can remove that digitally instead of waiting for people to be done drilling or angle grinding or sanding or babies to stop crying or dogs to start barking, etc.
Okay, I'll shut up for the last few samples, and then we'll bring it home.
Yes! Look at that upgrade. Bam!
My final few days of testing the S25 Ultra back in Brooklyn yielded one nice surprise. Charging speed has gotten a significant boost. Chucking it stone dead on the 45-watt charger at Coffee Check, I got to 72% in a half hour, and full right at 60 minutes. And battery consumption is on par too. Even with the power-intensive always-on display I insist on keeping toggled, this is an all-day phone, and then some. The surprises stop there. It's a solid phone, and an easy recommend to anyone carrying something older than, say, an S22 Ultra or an iPhone 14 Pro Max. The bummer of it all comes from the knowledge that Samsung has the hardware skill to deliver far more than this, especially now that its partnership with Google lets it offload much of the software stuff to Android. Instead, it's combining apparent cost-cutting with an abandonment of any kind of design ambition, both of which, I'm sorry to say, seem to stem from an attempt to emulate Apple. And I don't understand that as a strategy. I mean, if people want an iPhone, they can buy an iPhone. It's not like the Ultra is any cheaper here in the States. As always, you can take advantage of trade-in offers and other promos, since Samsung is no stranger to discounts. But here's another reason I think Samsung shouldn't have taken its foot off the gas this year. The competition is fierce. That OnePlus 13 from late last year really impressed almost everyone, and it's $400 cheaper. And if you want to stay with Samsung, the company's Flip 6 and Fold 6 aren't the flashiest foldables, but they certainly provide more utility and fun than this workhorse. Here's hoping we soon see a return of the brand that mainstreamed those categories. The company teased a trifold on stage at Unpacked, and I eagerly await its arrival. Because that Samsung, the Samsung that pushes the envelope, is the Samsung I miss. And more importantly, I think the Samsung the industry needs. I used to think VPNs were only for people doing shady stuff online. Until I started spending over 100 days a year on the road. This video is sponsored by Surfshark, which I use to keep my browsing between me and the site I'm visiting. Why does that matter? Well, it lets me keep watching my favorite shows even when I'm out of the country. It lets me shop in the currencies I'm used to, bank the same way I always do, and for the same selection of content I'm used to seeing. And when I travel to countries that restrict access to certain sites, like the ones I need to do my job, Surfshark keeps me in business. In short, it's a tunnel to the internet I need that follows me wherever my travels take me. Secure your privacy with Surfshark and get an extra 4 months at the link in the description. Thanks to Surfshark for sponsoring this video. This video was produced following 1 week with the Galaxy S25 Ultra review sample provided by Samsung, shot partially on location in Northern California, for which Samsung provided travel, lodging, and some meals. As always, though, I didn't give that manufacturer any editorial input, and it was afforded no rights of copy approval or early preview. Samsung is seeing this for the first time right alongside you. Please subscribe if you'd like to see more videos like this, and check out my review of the Huawei Trifold if you'd like to see how useful that form factor can be and where Samsung could improve upon it. Until next time, from Michael Fisher, Captain Two Phones on all the socials, thanks for watching. And stay mobile, my friends.